Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel as part of Sustainable Fashion Apparel brought to you by CommonShare. So we at CommonShare, we are really proud of this event and the amazing panel which we have for you. We are focused on enabling businesses everywhere to find and build relationships with the world's highest quality sustainable producers. So if you would like to find out any more information about us, please feel free to reach out. Without further ado, for this panel on regenerative farming versus regenerative fiber, I would like to introduce to you your moderator, who is Elizabeth, and I'll let Elizabeth talk a little bit about her experience as well, and then introduce the panelists. Thank you all so much for being here. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Nina. I'm really glad to be here and really excited to share the next hour or so with you all, with these experts we have on the panel today. I work as the executive director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and we were founded by Bronner's, Patagonia, and the Rodeo Institute several years ago to create a new standard, basically defining regenerative organic agriculture, and we launched this 2 years ago. It's called Regenerative Organic Certified, and this is a certification program that is built on organic as the baseline, but then we have a focus in 3 pillars. That is soil health, animal welfare, and social fairness for farmers and farm workers. We concluded our pilot last year, and we are now open for business, and we have been receiving applications around the world from all kinds of different commodities and sectors, but a lot of interest in fibers, in regenerative fibers, particularly in cotton and with hides. And so, I have some experiences to share on that, but of course, we'll be looking to the expertise here on the panel to talk about with you as we go through this morning. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague with Rodale for an introduction, Ms. Annie Brown.
Hi, I'm Annie Brown. I'm the Director of Development at Rodale Institute. And for those of you who don't know Rodale, we've been around almost 75 years. We'll be celebrating our 75th birthday next year. And our claim to fame is really bringing organic to the United States in the early 1940s, or organic as we think of it as today. Of course, all of our great grandparents farmed organically, but just called it farming. But we created the definition of organic, and our most seminal work right now is a 40-year study that's the longest side-by-side trials of grain crops grown conventionally versus organically. And we've proven over time all of the benefits of organic versus conventional. And I'd be happy to go into that research a bit later, but for now, I will pass it on to the next person. How about Rachel?
Thanks, Annie. Hi, my name is Rachel Kanner-Kutnis. I work at Patagonia on the Social and Environmental Responsibility team, and I manage our work with Elizabeth Whitlow and the Regenerative Organic Alliance on the ROC. Specifically, I manage projects with smallholder farmers in India and then expanding around the world this year. So excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation. Thanks.
I think I'm next. Hi, my name is Rebecca Burgess. I'm the Executive Director of Fibershed, and we work on the regionalization and land regeneration capacity building in landscapes in North Central California, and we have affiliate communities in 40 locations, 44 locations nationally and internationally that are working on fiber sovereignty, regional economic development, and focusing on diversifying what fibers we have access to and moving us off fossil carbon derived materials into biosphere-based materials that have a decomposition pathway. So our work spans between soil to skin. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Rebecca. I've been a longtime fan of Fibershed. They're dear to my heart and located near me up here in Northern California is where you started. So it's been so great to learn more about the work that you're doing, especially on the ground, and this whole concept of regionalizing fiber and food, which I think are really important for all of us to consider these movements. So for the panel, though, we all got into conversation last week and just in our kind of preparation call and had this very riveting conversation about what's going on in regenerative fibers. And we ended up focusing a lot of our conversation on cotton and specifically on organic cotton and what the current challenges are in the market. And so I would love to start with the question to each of you of like what you see as the very serious challenges with the increased market demand for better fiber and specifically for organic cotton and some of the implications of that. And why don't we start with you, Rebecca, and then move to Rachel.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm noticing a big upsurge in requests for organic cotton. I'm also seeing a big upsurge in requests for domestic materials, particularly after COVID and overexposure into global supply chains, complexities and timeframes being so disrupted, that people at different brands of many different sizes have been making requests to see if they can have more transparency into the supply chain. I think what's yet to be determined here is, can those who are making these requests truly afford the request that's being made? Some can, maybe some are unwilling. I think we all can, because really what we're asking for at some level is to internalize all of the costs that we've been externalizing. So I can speak to the challenges in the United States, and I think that might set up Annie and Rachel to discuss some of the various differences in international cotton production. In the US, we've been moving people into urban landscapes since basically since Earl Butz, our Secretary of Agriculture, decided it was a good idea to move about 65 million people out of rural communities. And so the system became increasingly centralized, meaning more and more large machinery and in fact, chemistry used, because we also have had a robust labor rights, beautiful tour de force in the United States. I mean, yes, it has to keep being rebirthed every generation, but we have, the 5-day work week, we have weekends. These are all due to people giving their lives for this cause. And so part of the force also and the complexity in the United States is that you still see a labor movement, especially in California. I mean, there has been a historic farm worker labor movement. So what this means is, I think by the end of next year, California will be paying $15 an hour for hand weeding, for instance. So, and the sovereignty of that farm worker is that they get to leave the land if they want. They're not tethered to it. They're not an indentured servant. They are not a slave. They have access to full life. And we would say 15 an hour is definitely not even really enough in some of the communities. But let's just say comparatively, if you were to take that wage and translate it to other places in the world, that might be a wage that someone makes in a month. Mm-hmm. And that's made per hour. Yeah. So I think if you're looking at labor rights, you have to kind of think about what country you're in, what country you benefit from, what democracy that you depend upon, or you want to depend upon, or you want to improve. And I always say invest in those systems, because you're already living here. If you have corporate headquarters here, like this is the system that needs our attention and support. And it's our culture, maybe it needs to become more of a culture, but it needs our investment. So I find that though challenging though, those are some values that I put into play, but how do you do that with $15 an hour in a hand weeding system? I have some ideas, but they're considered fairly revolutionary by most. So, but anyway, cotton, I'll just say organic cotton, last thing, it's around on average $30 to $40 an acre to spray organic or to spray cotton with a Roundup or glyphosate based herbicide. Yeah. In California, it's sometimes between $1,500 and $4,000 an acre to hand weed 1 pass per acre. So if you compare that system, you're already looking at potentially, if you weed 2 times in a season, your cotton just on the weeding alone could be $4 a pound.
Yeah. I wonder what is the percentage of cotton produced here too? I think it's quite small domestically. It's like less than 2% of the world demand for organic cotton. I'm
Gosh,
thinking,
no, I think we're like the 5th largest producer in the world. I
I
believe
read
that California produces the world's most concentrated large amount of extra long staple cotton in the world. We produce 439 million pounds per year, and that's by far the largest ELS producer in the world.
that
So,
statistic was for organic cotton.
oh, organic. No, yeah, we flail there. But that's
Yeah.
generally because of hand weeding and defoliation techniques, because hand picking is what you can do in countries where there's disparate labor between the white collar jobs in the US and the jobs of farm workers overseas. So you can go out there and send teams of people to hand pick. In the United States, if you put the hand picking onto the hand weeding, yeah, it's different. So, so defoliation is something that has been used typically, and often that's chemical based. You could use a frost, and that's what we bank on, but the frosts aren't always predictable. So that's where you see a kind of a moving to chemistry element in defoliation. So those are the challenge points. I think they're all surmountable, but I definitely think, yeah, we aren't scaling organic cotton for various reasons, and have lots of, it has to do with microclimate, geomorphology, labor rights, state law, federal law. There's all kinds of reasons why it's not quite scaled. West Texas is a great example of where it has scaled though.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you. Rachel,
Sure.
so we move to you and hear just your perspective on this whole conversation around demand and the challenges and the pain points to demand, specifically around organic cotton.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Rebecca, to hear about kind of all the nuances that you're seeing in California. I think, you know, Patagonia, we've sourced organic cotton since the mid-90s. We source some from the US, but a lot of it is sourced internationally. And these regenerative organic certified pilots that we're working on are in India, which is working with smallholder farmers. So, you know, owning between like 1 and 3 acres. It's a very, very different context. And that is where you can have hand weeding and hand picking, because the farmers can actually do it themselves with their family members in the local community. It's quite small amounts of land. But of course, it's completely a different story when it comes to wages and the sources of income and all of that. So yeah, I mean, I think that just to speak a little bit to kind of where we've seen excitement with working with ROC and with organic cotton is that it promotes, you know, a multi-cropping system, which means more diverse streams of income to the farmers. And so that's the piece that we're really excited about. We also work with another organization to make sure that the organic premiums are actually getting to the farmers. So as much as there's many, many challenges in these projects, we're trying to look and address some of them, and the cotton is much more expensive. And I think for us, we've decided that that's a value, you know, and it's important to us. And so, and Patagonia is a different type of a brand, you know, so we're able to kind of absorb that cost, but it's definitely a challenge, and we're seeing more and more brands wanting to do and source this type of cotton. And I don't know that we've all understood all the costs that will be entailed with doing that when we try to scale it. So anyway, but in terms of kind of demand, yeah, I think we've seen a huge uptick in demand for organic cotton. There were a lot of challenges in the global organic cotton market this year. COVID, of course, there were a lot of problems with fraud with organic certificates in India. We have a lot of challenges going on also in China. And so, you know, I think there's this a big shift that had kind of happened, that more and more brands wanted to source organic cotton, but there wasn't necessarily more that existed. And in fact, we didn't have as much as we thought. And so that supply demand challenge has been a really significant one this year. You know, I think with Patagonia and with the pilots that we're working with, we committed to long-term contracts with our suppliers and with the farmers. So 3 to 5 years that we've committed to sourcing their cotton. And I think that kind of a commitment is really important, especially when you're transitioning to different types of agricultural practices, that you have that security that will be, you know, purchasing all of the cotton that is produced. And I was talking about kind of like the higher prices and the premiums that we're also paying, and making sure that it's all going to the farmers and where it belongs. So yeah, that's just kind of some of the things that come to mind with this question.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of directions we could take this. And we did talk about the fact that because of the increase in demand, there was suddenly a lot of problems with fraudulent claims, and then questioning the credibility of the certifications. And so, Annie, I thought maybe you might want to speak on that, being longtime organic certified there at Rodale, and if you want to touch on just kind of the credibility of certifications and how that can help lead to more supply and of high integrity products that are produced and meet those claims that are behind them.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, Rodale's been involved in USDA organic certified since it began. Our founder's son, so we were founded by a man named J.I. Rodale, and his son, Bob Rodale, was instrumental in creating the USDA organic seal. And in fact, the side-by-side trials that I was discussing earlier were important in terms of how Congress said, yes, absolutely, we now see the scientific proof of why organic is actually a different system that has to be, there has to be a certification therein, and the farmers have to be rewarded for that certification. So we've been on the front lines with policy work in Washington, in particular, with the creation of the seal all throughout the 80s and the 90s. And for us, it is the standard by which everything else is graded upon, right? So we have to have, as Elizabeth said, the USDA organic seal before we get to the regenerative organic certification. So absolutely, we find it incredibly important, but certainly we value those farmers who don't want to go through the process of certification. But we certainly hope that at some point they would actually go ahead and become certified, understanding the hurdles they're in. And Elizabeth, if you want me to talk about the consulting services now, or?
Sure. I mean, we could jump right into that. This was leading to another question about like
sure,
that affects the cost of
yeah,
producing.
Let's do that.
Different materials, and love to have you kind of start off with what Rodale's been doing to support farmers in transition, and kind of some of the policies that you have been able to utilize to help do that, help the farmers with the transition.
Yeah, for sure. So there are a lot of hurdles, right, to organic certification, and there's a lot more to regenerative organic certification, but they're not insurmountable at all. We at Rodale Institute, again, going back to our policy roots, worked with the state of Pennsylvania, maybe starting 4 years ago, but finally it actually took hold about 2 years ago, where the state of Pennsylvania realized that if they want to revitalize rural economies in the state, that they needed to help fund the transition of farmers to organic. So they put us in the line item as a line item in their budget, and underwrote our consulting services to about $750,000 a year for the last 2 years. So in March 2019, we created our organic crop consultants. And it started with one gentleman who was working primarily with Pennsylvania farmers who wanted to transition to organic. All of the consulting services were underwritten by that line item in the state of Pennsylvania. So farmers could call us and ask us for any advice, information. We gave them, we could hold their hand walking through their farms, and when they wanted to transition a plot or entire farm, we were there. We can help them with the paperwork. We can help them identify markets. So this consulting service is incredibly robust. And in this period of 2 years, based on the initial funding from the state of Pennsylvania that allowed these farm services, consulting services, to be free, we have expanded now to Minnesota and Iowa and Michigan and several other states in the Midwest, as well as into Georgia. So we now have 5 organic crop consultants, and we've just signed our 275th farmer who wants to transition either all or part of their operation. So in in such a short amount of time, I feel like we are making great strides. Again, we're not able to, underwrite the lease of land or the other capital hurdles, although we are bringing in investors, and it's becoming a huge catalyst for change in ways that we hadn't predicted, or the state of Pennsylvania hadn't predicted.
It's really amazing. I've seen some of those studies that show the organic hotspots in Pennsylvania, in and around, and how much it's trickled out into those communities. And it goes back to what Rebecca was talking about also, about this bioregionalizing and really supporting a whole community with the farming system and the farmers feeding into that region. Rebecca, maybe you could touch on some of your, like some of the policy work you're familiar with here in California, the Healthy Soils Initiative, perhaps, or some of these others that have helped you offset the cost of transition for farmers who you work with, and also maybe go into a little bit more detail on what some of those costs are, like Annie just mentioned, leasing the land, and just some of the other challenges.
Yes, well, I was just going to say, one of the places where they've operationalized a lot of the soil to skin components of this actually is in the Carolinas. After North American Free Trade Agreement and CAFTA, a lot of those mills were moved south of the border, but there is, just to say, I'll jump to California in one moment, still a Carolina textile district and a nonprofit called Industrial Commons that helps guide them. And you can have, a brand can go to their brand coordinator and work with a whole bunch of the mills that are coordinated through that district. And it's really, I mean, of course, there's cotton being grown in the Carolinas. We know Eric Henry's work, and there's a lot going on in certain parts of the country where hubs are kind of holding together and getting stronger and reducing the mileage and the footprint, and basically it's working. So we take, I mention them because we take a lot of our interest and stride from what we see happening there, and wanting to create a textile district that can take brands from soil to skin. That's really a North Star for us. And starting with the soil, we've been very inspired by the work that came out of the first New Deal. We hope for a second kind of green, newish deal. Something, even if they don't call it that because it's too polarizing of a term, the effect of something like that would be great. So after the first New Deal, the work to create soil conservation practices nationally was a big effort that was funded at the federal level, but instituted at the local level through different boards of directors that were local ranchers and farmers that held kind of the technical assistance arm to get some of these practices implemented. Everything from revegetating creeks, to rangeland seeding programs, silvopasture, putting native and or fruit producing trees back in a grazing system. We've used a lot of the existing infrastructure here in California, which is that arm of the USDA that kind of shows itself in your local community, because they have great GIS mapping skills. They have great ability to do grazing management plans. Does it need more funding? Yes. Does it need more support? Absolutely. But I love that our government did intend to create a dispersal of funds from a federal level that was locally managed for landscapes to be restored. And so we've been looking at how to wield that system and try to enhance and improve upon it. And one of the ways in which those practices are implemented now is that our state, like last year, I think it was $27 million was put forward through our California Department of Food and Agriculture to implement a suite of the same practices that actually were supported during the New Deal. So there was this marriage of thought leadership that had come out of the 1930s, and our state reinvigorated the funding to see those practices more thoroughly funded. So we saw $600,000 in grants just in 1 year for our producer program. And that's not to say that there weren't, that's just we have 170 members, but there are a lot more ag community members in the that are doing this work. So Healthy Soils program has been great. We'd like to see our state set a carbon goal so that we can, a drawdown goal, so we can continue to enhance the funding for biological based climate mitigation. What else? EQUIP, Environmental Quality and Incentives program has been great. So that's the exciting part about working domestically, because as I'm inviting the brands that we're working with, I'm like, get involved in that form of policy, like get involved in the policy that actually enhances your supply chain, because that's where we need you. Business has a big sway in government, as we know, but use it for good, and actually advocate for things that you wouldn't expect, like creating food hubs, because what comes right after a food hub? A fiber hub. And we are looking at food hub language in a bill that's in appropriations right now that would help really decentralize our food system in our state and help small and mid-scale farmers become part of the procurement for schools. But as you start reinvigorating rural economies, the whole system starts to feel like this breath of life in it. So I would say, the policy work is extremely important. I think at the state and county level, though, there's just great work we can do. And again, reinvestment in your region allows you to resensitize to the local policies, resensitize yourself to your relationship with your representatives, and have this democracy marshaled in the direction of sustaining landscapes and regenerating those landscapes. And so we've been doing that as much as possible, but I think the team just needs to get bigger.
I love it. I love it. And I know this is odd. I didn't tell you this in advance, Rachel, but just want to pick up on that thread where Rebecca is saying like brands can have such influence on policy. Can you tell us a little bit about what Patagonia has been doing in that regard? I know with like helping get out the vote about public lands and all kinds of ways that Patagonia is, as a brand, deeply involved in helping affect change in policy, and also some of the work that your grants program is doing with all the organizations who are doing that on the ground around kind of regenerative farming. So sorry I didn't prepare you for that, but it just reminded me. So
yeah, it's kind of outside my area of expertise, but Patagonia definitely, that we do a lot of advocacy, a lot of work domestically, but also internationally, where we have stores, some of the local, we do all this grant making as well to support organizations, especially domestically, that are focusing on growing the organic movement and doing advocacy and kind of supporting all of this work. So it's definitely a huge component of like our strategy towards regenerative agriculture, and there are a lot of awesome people in the company working on this. It's just not specifically the area that I specialize in, but it's definitely an exciting piece of work that we've been doing.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, let's get into the weeds a little bit here, literally. Let's talk about some of the challenges in just looking at regenerative farming and cotton. And I'd love to hear some of your learnings, Rachel, in working with the pilots in India on incorporating regenerative practices so that farmers could get away from using synthetic chemicals for controlling weeds, and kind of some of the innovation and support and some of your partners who helped with that.
Sure. Yeah. So our work in this, we started, I think 3 or 4 years ago now. We brought our major organic cotton suppliers to Ventura, where we're headquartered, and talked to them about this idea of regenerative organic and kind of this journey that we wanted to start, and actually brought them to a local farm, which very well, Apricot Lane Farm, that has been farming regeneratively for a while, to kind of inspire them and get them excited. And so 2 of our main organic cotton suppliers in India, Arvind and Pratibha, decided to start on this journey with us. We started pretty small with about 160 farmers basically in central India, and we're growing to like over 2,000 next year. So it's been a lot of expansion, and as I said, it's really smallholder farmers. So it's kind of like one by one you add them on to get enough to get the cotton that we need. But I think we started with farmers that were already organic. So already organic cotton farmers, they'd already made the transition. And I think that was really a good way to kind of like start this work, that we weren't starting like from conventional, we were starting from organic. And we were also, especially in the regions that our suppliers chose, a lot of those farmers were already doing multi-cropping systems because they had, such small plots of land that they kind of needed to use every piece of it that they possibly could to support themselves. But with bringing in ROC and all of these other additional practices, we definitely saw a big increase in the number of crops that they're growing, and our partners are doing research trying to figure out what are the best crops to grow alongside cotton, kind of like what's the best way to build a system that works for the soil, but also for the farmer. I think we've definitely seen challenges. I think, some of the challenges are around like crop rotations and kind of cover cropping all year round, that we're working in areas that have a monsoon, but then go through a drought period. And so how can we expect people to be, watering, kind of paying for water when they're trying to support themselves, So I think some of the challenges that we've seen are very specific to the regions and to the smallholder context that we're operating in. And as kind of Annie was saying, just like the challenges of certification itself, right? Certification is a lot of work. We were already organic, but getting through all the additional pieces, ROC requires also a fair trade certification for the social fairness side. And so that's been a journey for us as well, working with the farmers and our suppliers to get to the fair trade certification, to build kind of like the farmer group and have them be kind of like set up to take this on. So it's definitely been, it's been a journey with a lot of challenges, but I do think that we're seeing, I think one of the most powerful kind of quotes that I got from when I was traveling and visiting with the farmers, one of the farmers said, this is the way that my, like we were saying, Annie, this is the way my great grandfather farmed. And then all these people came in and told us to use all these chemicals, and we saw that it was hurting us. So they had stopped and moved to organic, but then with regenerative, they were really moving back more towards the way that they had been farming before. And also just like understanding some of the traditional practices and the local just, ways of farming is just so beautiful. And being able to really respect and have these farmers just, use the traditional techniques that they've always known and have it be a part of this has been really special.
Yeah. I also understand that it's really challenging for those farmers to source organic seed, that much of the seed that they can get is GMO seed. And so that brings.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we're working also with the Organic Cotton Accelerator. They're doing a seed program to try to increase the amount of non-GMO seed that's available in India. And we do GMO testing as well as part of that program. So I think, and that's why some countries where they haven't allowed GMO, it's a good place to kind of start trying to move this work as well, where you don't have as much of that problem.
Yeah, that Organic Cotton Accelerator project is almost like another version of Rodale in other countries, right? Like they're really supporting on the ground. And as I understand, they worked with 25,000 farmers last year, I think, and have aims for twice that this year. Is that? Do you want to talk a little bit about OCA, and then let's move back to Annie?
Yeah, sorry, I know that's a little out of scope, but yeah, I'm not sure if folks on this call are familiar. It's an organization, basically organic cotton has been less than 1% of the world's cotton for decades, and it has not grown the way brands like Patagonia had hoped it would when we started sourcing like this in the mid-90s. And so the Organic Cotton Accelerator is trying to come in and accelerate the growth of organic cotton and try to kind of like fix some of the challenges that we've seen, like the premiums actually getting to the farmers, like the GMO testing, the seed. They're doing different studies on like crop diversity and all that kind of stuff. And so it just so happened that we had started working with them the same time that we started working with the ROC on pilots with the same suppliers. And so we joined them. And I think it's been like a really incredible partnership that we've been able to do since we started the ROC project, so working with them as well. And yeah, I mean, they work with many brands and many farmers all around, all organic cotton farms all around India. And then I think they're expanding to other countries actually next year as well.
Yeah, cool. Well, Annie, let's pick up on that as far as the accelerator, the organic accelerators, since you are the legacy group of that here in the US and other countries too, I believe. You're going to start working in some other countries. But I thought we could just talk a little bit about some of the challenges with incorporating these regenerative practices, where, as Rachel mentioned, that keeping the soil covered, planting, doing vigorous crop rotations. And so some of the innovation that Rodale has introduced around that, particularly I'm thinking of the trials up in Pennsylvania with the roller crimper, and just some of those benefits that you've seen by implementing this concept more of keeping the soil covered.
Yeah, certainly. And just full disclosure, I'm not a farmer or a researcher. But certainly vested in the work that we do at Rodale. And for us, you know, again, going back to our roots with regard to Bob Rodale and the concept of regenerative farming. Bob looked at the landscape back in the 1980s, and he saw where organic was going, and he didn't feel that it was enough as a system. And so he coined the term regenerative organic agriculture as a way to always continuously be improving the soil. And he said, you know, there's a number of ways we can do this, but the most effective certainly is keeping the soil covered in fallow times, and using cover crops and crop rotation and integrating animals. So composting services, or composting. And if you don't do that, then the soil doesn't grow and the soil does not become healthy. And so it's absolutely imperative that we look to every season to continuously improve. And those are the methods that we implement. And our CEO, his name is Jeff Moyer. If you've never met Jeff, he's a legend in the industry. He started at Rodale. I think he was 22 and at $2.65 an hour as a farmhand. And he's now our CEO. He was our farm manager for years and years. And Jeff Moyer is the inventor of something called the roller crimper. And this is a piece of machinery that has been, it's definitely not as important as the plow, but we certainly think that the invention of it has created a new system of organic agriculture that could not exist without this this piece of equipment. Essentially, it allows the farmer not to have to till, not to have to disturb the land, so that you can go through and you crimp the crop before the cover crop and are able to plant right into the ground, so that you get this cover crop that allows the soil to be protected and enhanced, but the new crop coming up is able to be planted within that. So it's revolutionized organic farming, most certainly. And it's a new method. Again, new is relative terms, right? So it was back in the 1980s. It didn't exist though when our great grandparents, when we talk about, you know, organic farming as just farming, this method was not there. But yet the method that you were referring to, Rachel, in terms of the older systems that your farmers are using in India, the traditional systems, they found that through all of the work that they've done over the years, that if they don't improve that soil, if they don't keep those crops nourished, that it's not going to give back to them. So, I mean, I think that's really the core of what we're talking about with regard to regenerative organic agriculture, or regenerative agriculture in general, is just keeping that front and center, that the more we feed the soil and take care of her, the more she's going to reward us. And if we deplete it by throwing all sorts of toxic chemicals onto it, we're gonna get further behind rather than advance. Whereas, you know, back in the 30s and 40s, when these chemicals were first introduced, it was, you know, better living through chemistry, right? And people jumped on the bandwagon like butts and said, hey, it's all about yield. And we can do that through a couple of different bottles, but here we are now, and we've done nothing but the opposite.
But tap the soil. And also I think the really exciting stuff in incorporating these methods is outlined in a Rodale white paper from a couple of years ago about the improved resiliency for in times of drought or flood. So it retains, like, that soil, as it builds organic matter, is like a living sponge, and it can retain the water and provide the moisture that those plants need. So there's a lot of other exciting kind of developments on that end, and also just lots of benefits. I also think of it a little bit like the One Straw Revolution, if you remember that movement by Fukuoka, and and similar, where you crimp the crop and it makes this mat, and it serves as a mulch. And I've seen people doing this in vineyards also. In our rock pilot, one of our site at Tablas Creek vineyards, they have this little, basically a mower and a adapted kind of way to take cover crop and crimp it down and keep it between the vine rows. They also have, they have made it into little mini bales that they use to feed the sheep that graze in between the vine rows, because they can't bring those sheep out during the, once the buds break and the leaves are there. So yeah, there's some really interesting things happening in that regard. It's very emergent and very exciting, like all the different things we're learning to do to incorporate regenerative. And Rebecca, I would love to go back to you on this conversation. I mean, we were talking about the cost of weeding from the farmers you're working with here, and just wondering if there's any methods that you all have discovered of, to try and eliminate some of the need for, except the labor for weeding, or any other kind of, I don't know, new learnings that you've incorporated.
Well, I think one of the things to think about just from a technical standpoint is that for those who are here from brands, the longer the staple of cotton, often the more desired that cotton is for just a kind of more of an heirloom quality garment. And one of the things that requires is a very long growing season. It could be 240 days in the field. It's one of the longest growing seasons of all crops.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're struggling with, especially in a system that has a temperate climate and a rainy season, as Rachel's saying, how do you keep the ground covered when you have 6 inches of rain per year? I mean, we really have to think, I think taking what, Jeff and Rodale did in Pennsylvania and thinking about the varied principles that they built, they were responding to rainfall, soil type, and crop rotations. And I think what we have to do is say, okay, we need to respond and innovate in these dryland, semi-arid systems with the same value set and principles at play, but the practices and even the equipment, I think, has to be revolutionized. And I say this from direct experience, trying to use a roller crimper in the San Joaquin Valley in the last 3 weeks. And we had to get the cotton in the ground, or we wouldn't get the yield, and the farmer would be out of business.
Yeah.
Literally, it was a very heated argument about when to roller crimp.
Uh-huh.
And it was roller crimped when it had to be to get that yield.
Yeah.
The planting date in our valley has been set for like 100 years. There's no like, oh, you get to plant late. It's not a joke. So you go and you roller crimp and the thing pops right back up.
Uh-huh.
And so then you're forced into, because it's early, right? Senescence hasn't set in. It hasn't gone to the seeding stage, but you don't have time. No matter how early you plant, because your cotton, you harvested in October.
Right.
And so I think what we are playing with here is like the cost of water, $200 an acre foot, like to get that cover crop started on a year where the rain doesn't assist you, adds to the price of the cotton. And then in an area like with 40 million people, like in California, when you've got this tension over water use, and in India, the population density exceeds what we see here in California. So, you're making these choices, fiber, food, urban populations, very similar to India. And not that we have a monsoon here, but we have a Mediterranean semi-arid climate. And so we have a season of rain and an arid season. And the cotton grows in the arid season. So you're irrigating. But that's, possible. It's possible to do all this well. But it's again, I think we need to strip down to these core value systems of what do we need to keep the soil biology living? What do we need to do? We absolutely need to keep it covered, but we're exploring, like in a dry year, does that just mean if we can't get the rain and we know that roller crimper is probably going to create a situation where the farmer's going to have to use herbicides, which is counterintuitive to our whole mission.
Sure.
Then what we need to do is actually think about maybe just a really heavy compost application.
Yeah.
And we need to think about other, maybe the heavy straw bedding from some of our chicken coops needs to go onto that. Yeah. Like instead of trying to maybe grow in those dry years where we might have gotten 4 inches of rain, but the snowpack, right, is what's bringing the water through during the dry system. So if the snowpack stays, which it's predicted not to if we don't change things with climate, but if we were to continue to have this, I think we can apply regenerative ag principles again, but again, we just have to be really thoughtful about translation into the geomorphological realities that we're facing in different valleys, different microclimates, precipitation patterns. So what I struggle with is like broad scale adoption of one methodology, because methodologies will not translate across landscapes. And we have to be really supportive of each other to innovate at deeper philosophical and values principles, because we could shoot ourselves in the foot by trying to prescribe methodologies.
Well, and I don't think that anyone's prescribing the roller crimper, just using it as an example. It doesn't apply in India either. So, I just think it's a great example of some innovation that's happened that's really changed.
It works great in orchards and vineyards for sure. It's beautiful in that environment, and it may actually work. It's just like we just have to innovate more. We have to change the cover crop seed mix. We have to do it on a wet year. Yeah. But I just think making sure all those caveats come with it is really critical, so that we can scale our work without people having like that didn't work, because farmers.
Yeah. For sure.
If it doesn't work, they will not come back to the table, and that's the risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in its margins and the most to lose. So it is hard for farmers to step up and take those additional risks to something that has been tried and true. I just want to recognize the time here, and there's a question, and we probably should have had a disclaimer early on that we could have a panel for an hour or 2 hours on all the many different types of regenerative fibers, but we did choose to focus on cotton just because of Rachel's background and experience in working that, complemented by Rebecca's, and then of course Annie's at Rodale. But there's a question: is cotton as regenerative as other natural fibers like linen, hemp, or nettle? And why is regenerative ag in fashion focused on organic cotton? And I think it's a great question. And I'm whoever wants to take it.
Infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's just that we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in it. And so it's kind of the low hanging fruit. But do we need a bigger transition? Yes. Right. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Those other materials are extremely valuable. But again, in flax production, due to climate change, you're already seeing the places where you can do ret are changing in Belgium and France. Like in Southern Oregon, they're having drought. So if you have to start using chemical retting for those bast fibers or pool retting to creating those anaerobic conditions, you have environmental concerns in how you soften bast fibers like nettle, hemp, and flax. And so the chemistry has to be thoughtful. The water use has to be thoughtful. If the landscape's dehydrating like it is with climate change, we can't just use dew and microbes in the soil, which is, those materials would have laid flat on the ground after being dried and then laid down. So microbes could take the lignin and pectin out of it. So it's soft enough for a textile, but the climate's changing so much that some of those old school patterns are not as reliable. And so, we have to be sensitive about how to soften, I think, those materials.
Sensitive about softening. Okay. Rachel,
go ahead, Rachel. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. It's so interesting to hear, Rebecca, and to, just learn from your vast knowledge and expertise. I can just, speak to kind of Patagonia. I think cotton it's the most commonly used, crop fiber in the fashion industry. And so that's where I think a lot of things started, just because it's so much more prevalent. At Patagonia, it's not the majority, but it is the number one. When we were looking at thinking about regenerative, we're like, okay, which fibers do we grow? And cotton was the number one. And so that's why we started there. We do have a big focus on hemp, and we're trying to help support the growing industry in the U.S. But from again, I'm not like a materials expert, but from what I understand, like the processing phases of turning hemp into fiber, that industry doesn't quite exist yet in the U.S. And so it's right, developing that in order to make that something that's more viable that can be used. So I think there are a lot of factors, but yeah, I think, yeah, so that's my understanding of kind of like why we've all started with cotton, just because of the sheer prevalence of it.
Yeah.
And also it's really, I mean, if you've ever hand-picked it, it feels like a t-shirt upon arrival. And so that's just really something we shouldn't, because of all the industrialization and genetic engineering and horrific labor history that continues today. I mean, I still feel like the plant, I write about this a lot, like Gossypium hirsutum, Gossypium barbidens, these species have a beautiful history if you reel back to their indigeneity, whether that was South America, West Africa, China, Mesoamerica. I mean, gorgeous, beautiful agroecological history. And we started working with it, whatever, 8,000, 10,000 years ago, maybe longer. Some people argue much longer.
Where can we read about that, Rebecca? Because I would love to do, is that on your site, on your website? That's kind of...
You can read about the more modern history of it through Empire of Cotton. Highly recommend Empire of Cotton. But the history, just the development and genetic relationship we've had to it, I've learned a lot from Sally Fox, who might have books that she could recommend, but primarily it's an oral history. But I've also, I mean, it's pretty much, I think, out there if we were to Google where all of its locations were that kind of co-evolved at the same time. Actually, there's not just one place where they perfected it. Like I just found out in the last year that prior to Spanish colonization, cotton was being grown in what we now call New Mexico, Arizona. And the Tiwa Pueblo were growing it. And when the Spanish came, they couldn't believe how beautiful the gauzy-like shirts that had these lace patterns, and the Spanish, pulled them off the backs of the native community because they were so struck by them. And of course, domination and violence came with that. But the beauty of the plant should just not be lost on us just because we've done so many things to it that are really more our fault than the plant's fault. So I feel like we just have a ways to go to heal that relationship. So it's kind of one of those basic skills to stop with. We shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Annie, do you have any comments to add on this? Because then I have another question here. Good.
Oh, all I wanted to say is, so Rodale has expanded outside the Mid-Atlantic, and now we're based in California, in Ventura, Southern California, and also in Georgia, and as well as in north of Pennsylvania, northern Pennsylvania and the Poconos. And our work in all of these places, we're focusing on hemp and industrial hemp as well as fiber hemp, and using hemp as a cover crop within cotton systems in California. We're looking at that in the coming season. So our focus has definitely been turning toward industrial hemp and fiber hemp, and working with trying to create systems within the United States, working with a company right now who they want to create a processing plant. So hopefully, we'll be able to change a little bit of the access to fiber hemp in this country and not have to rely on processing outside in China primarily. And maybe that will change in terms of the demand for hemp versus cotton. So just wanted to throw that in there.
No, I'm glad you did. I know that you've been working with that at the Ventura research station, but I wondered if you were doing it in Georgia also. I know Kentucky, there's a lot of hemp there, and I think Patagonia was working with some farms in Kentucky with hemp farming. Rachel?
I think maybe Colorado too. There's a video on our website that talks a lot more in depth about it. Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that Kentucky or Colorado?
It's Kentucky, yep.
Kentucky, okay.
But it's okay, I'm sure they do it in Colorado too. I know there was a lot of movement on that with the folks at Mad Agriculture too. So I'm gonna go to this question because we're gonna be running out of time here shortly. So this person says, for a relatively small apparel importer from China, what would be a good resource for what's available to help the farmers that supply their cotton to our mills to transition to organic and become certified? We currently use a lot of BCI, but it is such a small portion of the total cotton we use. Rachel, do you want to take that since it's a more international?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Organic Cotton Accelerator could be helpful. They're not operating right now in China, but they do have resources of kind of organic cotton farmers in India and farmer groups that you can work with, and they can make that direct connection. And so that could be a helpful place to start. You know, starting kind of like with the certification, seeing who's already with like GOS, which is the Global Organic Textile Standard, which is the organic standard for textiles, or kind of looking at some of the other certifications just to kind of go and see who's certified and maybe start establishing those connections. And, you know, reaching out to brands that are already doing this and kind of trying to get a lay of the land. There's a lot of folks that are operating in this space. Textile Exchange is also a really good resource for looking at those kind of things.
Great. Anyone else know of other tips or suggestions for this? Nope. Well, I would say also, I wish we had another hour or two, because I'd love to get into the animal agriculture and talk about hides and wool and cashmere and all those other regenerative fibers, but not that kind of time today. It looks like there aren't any more questions, and I see Nina has popped back in. Hi, Nina.
Hello, thank you all so much for participating in the panel discussion. It was really interesting, and as you rightly said, we can definitely rearrange more panels to go even deeper into the topic as well. But thank you all so much for your time. So thank you, Elizabeth, for moderating, Annie, Rachel, and Rebecca for participating as panelists. If anyone does have any questions following up from this, you can feel free to send us an email at the organizers of CommonShare, and then we can forward them on to the amazing panelists. In terms of the networking, which is happening at the end of each day, please keep an eye on your inboxes, as we're doing networking groups, so small groups, and some will be with the speakers and some will be with other participants as well. So for you all moderators and panelists, thank you as well, and you're welcome to join at any point too. And we really look forward to seeing how we can move towards regenerative farming in the future. And thank you so much for all of your opinions and for the debate.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, for moderating.
Loved it. All right. Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.